Hello and welcome to the dungeon. I'm your host Rob. In today's video, I want to talk about building better and more interesting and hopefully more challenging encounters. It's no surprise to anybody at this point that a lot of fights in 5th edition, if you've tried to run fights as a dungeon master, turn out to be your player is basically just killing your boss in 1 or 2 rounds and that's it. Fight over. And that's okay if it happens every now and then, but when it happens consistently every single fight, A, it's very frustrating as a dungeon master. You feel like you're not really, giving your players a good challenge. But B, it's a bit of a letdown as a player as well. You kind of want to be challenged. Like, you also want to win as a player, of course. You don't want your party to constantly be dying and having your character get killed all the time. But you do want the threat of your character being killed. You at least want that sense that, like, this could go bad at any second, and that we won that fight because we had good tactics, or we, had some crazy dice rolls or whatever. Like, you want that thrill of victory, but victory doesn't mean anything if there's no challenge in it. And I think that one problem 5th edition has had, especially as time's gone on and we've had, power creep and whatnot, is that it's very easy for players to just kill your bosses in 1 or 2 rounds of combat. And there's a lot of reasons for this. Part of it is because spells like Counterspell have just become insanely powerful, right? If you're a Dungeon Master from a long time ago, you probably remember that things like liches used to be a real threat. And, I've had multiple campaigns now where liches are no problem for my players at all, because, the lich casts a spell, they counterspell it. Maybe the lich uses his reaction to try to counterspell their counterspell, but there's probably somebody in the party who had another counterspell ready. And, between multiple players, they're able to counterspell the lich. And what does a lich really have if you take away his spell casting? Basically nothing. Same thing goes for archmages and other powerful spellcasters. It's even worse if you're trying to fight, like, say you're trying to fight some sort of high priestess and she's a cleric. She doesn't even have counterspell on her spell list, Now she's really screwed, right? If it's like the high priestess of Lolth or something, She's got no chance. She can't counterspell anything the party does. Party can counterspell her, right? But even things like just Action Surge, especially, like, Action Surge is pretty powerful when you're in Tier 2 especially. But when you start hitting Tier 3 and Tier 4 levels of play, Action Surge becomes incredibly good. And I'm not saying it's too good or anything like that, because honestly, it's kind of in line with, like, high-level smites and high-level spells. And, like, the thing is, everything is really good at Tier 3 and Tier 4, right? Except for the monsters, and that's kind of my issue. I remember we had one campaign. We had an Arcane Archer, and I think this campaign went to 20, but I believe we were 17 or 18 when the fight occurred. So the fighter did not have his 4th attack around yet, but he had 3. He's using a, magical longbow with magical arrows. He's got his 3 attacks around. He's an Arcane Archer, so he couldn't use a crossbow with Crossbow Expert or anything like that. But, he could use Curving Shot or something as a bonus action or whatever else he wanted to do, right? And he would, even without Action Surge, would often do, in the neighborhood of 70 to 100 damage a round pretty consistently. And like I said, he might Curving Shot, so maybe he misses the main target and has to hit something else, or he, but he might use, like, Grasping Arrow or something like that, right? There was always lots of options. But, if he dropped Action Surge, he would probably be doing between 100 and 150 damage single-handedly himself, in 1 round of combat, right? And that's including things like sharpshooter damage, of course. It's including his dexterity bonuses. It's including his magic bow and the magic arrow. And, it's including everything. But a lot of these endgame bosses that you look at in the monster manual, they might only have 300 or 350 hit points. And if one guy is doing 150 damage in the first round of combat, just one character, your fight's only going to last 1 or 2 rounds. And this goes down to a couple basic things. My chair's being really squeaky. I'm going to try moving up slightly so we're not rubbing against the bookshelf. Anyways, let me just grab my monster manual. Got it right over here. One of the problems is that, to be honest, a lot of monsters, they just don't have the hit points or the armor class to be able to deal with high-level characters. And part of this is because that's just the way the game was designed, right? Wizards determined that players like hitting more than they like missing. So they kind of balanced the game so that you would always roughly have that 65 to 70-ish% chance of hitting at any level range. But when you start adding in like really high-end items and things like, say, like the archery fighting style, like let's go back to the arcane archer, right? So even using sharpshooter for that -5 to hit penalty in exchange for that +10 damage bonus, right? He has the archery fighting style to help compensate for that -5. He's got max dexterity, right? He's got his +6 proficiency bonus at this point because we're looking at 17th plus level, right? Or 18th level, whatever he was. So he's got that. He's got a magic bow and magic arrows, both of which have 2 hit bonuses and damage bonuses. And so what was originally supposed to be like this balancing, like, okay, we're going to make it harder to hit. It's a lot riskier to attack. And, if you miss, you're not doing any damage. So that kind of sucks. But if you hit, the trade-off is that you do this extra damage. And it's just like, oh, no. It really doesn't matter. Like, unless he rolls a 1 or a 2, he's probably going to hit. Maybe he misses on a 3 or 4. Whatever. It doesn't really matter. My point is, he's hitting, even with a -5 hit penalty, he's hitting 85% of the time, probably 80% of the time, and he's just doing tons and tons of damage. And that's one guy. That doesn't include the rest of the party. That doesn't include our paladin, who's going to drop a bunch of, smites and use all our high-level spell slots to try to burn down the monster, right? It doesn't include the wizard, who's dropping high-level spell slots. And, even if you have, like, backup minions or whatever, the wizard's going to, like, force cage those things out so you can just tunnel the boss down and then, clear the minions out later or whatever, right? It becomes very, very simple for a high-level party to just tunnel through the boss's hit points. But like I said, part of that's the game design. Part of it, I think, is the monster design. We already know that the CR system doesn't work particularly well, especially at higher levels. I hear a lot of people say the game is broken at high levels. I do not believe that. I just think you just need to build better encounters, and that's partly what we're going to talk about in this video. Right? We haven't done a DM video in a while, so I figured we'll just, do something for the Dungeon Masters, right? Part of it, too, is that a lot of the monsters in the Monster Manual are just really basic. They don't have a lot of special abilities. I know, if anybody's familiar with Matt Colville's channel, he did a video, several years back, but he was talking about how he likes to import things from 4th edition D&D. And 4th edition gets a bad rap a lot of times. But one thing, and I personally never played it, so I don't have an opinion on it. I played a bit of 3rd, and then we started moving into things like, Vampire the Masquerade and stuff like that, right? Now, the 3rd wasn't great. We just wanted to try some different stuff, And I'd played Basic and Expert and Masters and Companion and all the stuff from the D&D X series. We'd played Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. We'd played 2nd edition. We played a lot of Dungeons and Dragons over the years. We just wanted to try something else. So it wasn't the 3rd wasn't good or whatever. It's just, we were playing other stuff at that point. So I never played 4th edition at all, right? And so I don't really have an opinion on it, one way or the other. But one thing that Matt Colville talked about was that he felt a lot of monsters would have kind of like a signature move, right? And so the game was not as good in some senses, he thought, but he really liked how he could take like a signature move from a 4th edition version of the monster and just import it to that 5th edition version of the same exact monster. And now it just kind of became this cool thing where the players like, whoa, that's kind of weird. That's kind of unexpected. What is that? I didn't know that these things had that. And, I kind of liked that idea, right? One thing I've done is I've purchased, I guess I just grabbed these books too, a lot of third-party monster manual type books. So I've talked about this before. These are by Cobalt Press. We've got Tome of Beasts. We've got the Creature Codex. Put my thumb in there because there's a page I want to use for later. And I've got, in soft, tiny paperback, unfortunately, because that's the only version I could find it in at the time, the Toma Beast 2. And one thing I really like about the Kobold Press monsters is that they're very creative. And I've talked about a couple of these before. I've given some examples, but not really a lot. I did mention the Skyne Witch when we talked about the Vecna fight we had in my one campaign. And it had an ability where basically you would use this like foretelling type of thing, and everybody would have these dread visions, right? And it didn't really have a game like a combat impact. But what the Skyne Witch would do is that every single player had to write down how they thought the character on their left would die and what level they would die at. And if they were right, that character would be resurrected by these like divine forces at the moment of their death with all hit points and spell slots restored. And my players were actually able to exploit this because one of the players, they knew they were going to be fighting Vecna, and so he wrote down the player on his left was going to die to Vecna from one of his spells at their current level, because he knew they were probably going to be either that level or maybe they'd gain a level. But, you know, he decided to take a guess and say he's going to die at level, 18 or whatever they were at the time, fighting Vecna to one of Vecna's spells. And so as the combat started proceeding, his strategy, because the players all knew that, they'd had this vision, and if it came true, they'd be resurrected. And so he told the players, like, no, you need to like drop all your spell slots on smites, do as much damage to Vecna as you possibly can. Hold nothing back. And then when you die, you're just going to come back to life anyway. And so they were able to like use this to their advantage. Another guy, basically as a joke, had written the player to his left was going to die to friendly fire. So their party members killed that character during the fight with Vecna, most with AE spells. Like Vecna had done most of the damage, but then the players were like, no, she can't die yet. Throw her a heal, we gotta finish her off. So they engineered it so they could kill her, and she would come back to life with all her health and spell points and everything else restored. And it was kind of like metagaming, which is, not necessarily good. But like A, it was a cool ability that didn't really change the fight. But B, it was so memorable. My players still talk about that fight. And it wasn't because they killed Vecna, as cool as that was. It was because they were able to like use this cool ability that some random monster they'd fought like earlier in the adventure that I'd basically just chosen because it looked cool and because it had a cool ability. But they were able to use that to help them win the fight. And this is one thing I love about a lot of the Kobold Press monsters. I can like turn to probably any page here randomly. What do we got? Ikushiki. And if we go through here, it'll probably have some kind of just weird, random, cool ability. Like in this one, it has some sort of weird oil attack. It emits a thick, non-flammable, yellowish oil. And then, when it's underwater, the oil does blah, blah, blah. And anytime a creature moves with more than 10 feet through it, it has to make a DC 15 strength saving throw or be restrained by the thick oil until the end of its turn, blah, 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 right? And of course, it has water breathing. It has a constrict attack. But, like, just the fact that it has this, like, weird oil thing, the players are going to see that and think, like, oh, what's that? And when they try to move it and move through it, and they have to make, restraint checks and saving throws, and it's like, wow, okay, that's kind of weird, right? Creature on the next page has a churn water ability, which, allows it to, like, basically create a whirlpool. It does bludgeoning damage, is a saving throw for half, and you can be restrained by the whirlpool, right? Flipping to another random page. Oh, we've got some sort of weird named guy. Tarkun the Desiccated. Here's a picture of him, in case somebody's curious. He's got a blinding sandstorm ability. He's got a desiccated touch ability. He's got some weird move thing. He's only a challenge rating of 8, but he's some sort of like weird named. It says he's a medium fey, chaotic neutral. But yeah, he's got a desiccating fish attack. He's got all sorts of weird special attacks. He's got legendary resistances. Just some level 8 named fey guy. Let's flip to a different page. We got some clockwork stuff. Clockwork Archon. It has a siege monster ability. It has a mutable form, and it has a transforming weapon. It can actually transform its body, like its hands, like the T-1000 from Terminator 2, and like make weapons out of its own body and stuff, right? Like just every single thing in here has at least one sort of weird random special ability. I remember in one of my videos I was talking about some orcs that were from this one. And one of the things that they had was basically, it was like this one tribe of orc, but they would drink these like weird potions concocted by the orc shamans, and it basically gave them reckless attack, right? So it basically gave them the rage ability. And, you know, it was restricted because they had to actually drink this brew, and they could either like drink it as a bonus action. So it was basically like a barbarian rage, except you drink the potion, or they could have like already pre-drank it before they go into battle, right? Because it didn't end instantly the way the barbarian rage does and stuff. But it gave them rage, so and reckless attack. So now they're basically like orcs, but they're taking half damage and they're attacking with advantage. That automatically makes that orc way more fearsome. And then one of the things because I used one of these these orcs in a campaign, and I kind of built it up where, oh, it's just like this specific tribe of orcs, and people are afraid of them. They're not really afraid of normal orcs, but they're really afraid of these guys because they're known for their savagery and their brutality and their fierceness in battle. And so it's kind of built up. And then when the players fight them, and they realize these orcs are all drinking this like blood potion thing that the shamans have been cooking up, and it gives them like barbarian abilities. But they're basically just regular orcs, just a little bit tougher, right? Because they've got rage and reckless attack. And automatically, it just, you know, the players are used to orcs. Orcs are nothing special. But now suddenly they're like, oh, wait, like what if we do spell damage? Because it only seems to be like, you know, piercing, bludgeoning, you know, they're not like totem or like bear totem barbarians, right? It just basically simulates the base levels of these abilities, right? So now they're trying to do a bit more spell damage and stuff like that, and they're trying to find other ways to do it, you know? And it just made the encounter way more interesting just because you took basic regular orcs and gave them one special ability, right? In one of my campaigns, I wanted to show this guy. I had some sort of like demon guy. Well, he was supposed to be an archdevil, as you may have seen in that picture, but I actually screwed up and kept referring to him as a demon lord. So then later when I realized it was an archdevil, rather than admit that I was wrong, I just decided to make him a demon lord. Because who cares? My players aren't reading the book anyway, right? We just changed him to chaotic evil instead of lawful evil, and nobody knows any better, right? So my players had to fight this guy. But he has like a fear aura, so anybody within 20 feet of him at the start of their turn or entering the aura has to make a DC 20 wisdom saving throw. Because of course this guy's a CR 25 creature, right? He's not meant to be a pushover. He's an archdevil and or demon lord, right? He's got his legendary resistance and stuff. He's got spell casting, but he also had some really cool abilities too. Like he had this sort of like serpent lash thing that he could make, right? He could summon other demons. They're supposed to be devils, but obviously I had to change that rather than admit fault. You know, he's got his legendary actions. He has this horn thing that he can blow that it's a sickening blast, a 30-foot cone that's audible up to 600 feet away. Each creature in the cone must make a DC 20 Constitution saving throw or take 5d12 poison damage and be incapacitated for 1 minute. On a success, the creature takes half as much damage and isn't incapacitated. It uses 3 of its legendary actions to use that. Incapacitated creature can repeat the saving throw at the end of each of its turns, ending the effect on a turn if it makes a success, right? So, yes, 1 minute is a long time to be incapacitated, but you do get a saving throw at the end of every round, right? Point is, using creatures with interesting abilities your players haven't seen before, or just different versions of those creatures, can add a lot of tension automatically to the fight and make things more interesting and more challenging. Another thing is just using like lots of minions. I use minions in tons of my fights. And the minions aren't meant to be challenging. They're meant to just prove an obstacle, right? So, to give you a few examples, right? These are examples I've probably mentioned before because they're all from campaigns I've run before, right? But to go back to the Drow-Elf Matriarch example, right? So I had my players, I think they were 13th level at the time because the wizard just got Force Cage. And they were going up against this Drow-Elf. And she is a like 18th or 19th level cleric, whatever she is. Problem is, as I already mentioned earlier in my video, she doesn't have counterspell. My party has a wizard with counterspell, and we have a bard with counterspell. So I know that if her big thing is her high level spells, and she can't cast her high level spells, basically she's got nothing. She's going to just get absolutely destroyed. So I also know that being a cleric, she's not going to be the toughest hand-to-hand fighter for them to bring down. Yeah, she's going to have good armor class because she can wear, decent armor, but she's not going to be able to hold up to a whole party beating on her. It's just not going to happen. So I gave her like I said, she's like 18th level, the party's 13th level. So I gave her like this consort guy who's like her, boyfriend type guy, but he's a wizard. And I didn't want him to be super challenging for the party, so I made him 9th level, so he's lower than them. But he's high enough that he has 5th level spells, and more importantly, he has Counterspell. So he can cast Counterspell for her and try to help protect her. I also gave him an apprentice who was only 5th level, but I chose 5th level because it meant he was also higher enough to cast Counterspell. And he's not going to have a lot of 3rd level spell slots, and I only decided I would only save one Counterspell for him in the fight because I didn't want everybody casting Counterspell all the time, right? But I also knew that my players, instead of tunneling on the boss, they might just decide, let's just kill these wizard guys who are countering our spells because they're getting annoying. And that's perfectly fine, right? That's what they're there for, right? I also gave her like that captain of the guard guy because I kind of wanted somebody that my paladin and my barbarian could go up against, these kind of like hand-to-hand guys. And I think he was like a 13th level fighter or so. So he's roughly about the same level as the party, but just not as good, right? And then I gave her a ton of guards. And I think she had like 16 guards, but the guards were only like 3rd or 4th level. And the idea was that they were just going to be cannon fodder. They could form like a screen though, so the party can't just charge her instantly and get right in there, right? And also they all were equipped with like, swords, but they also all had crossbows. And I knew that even though these guys have non-magical crossbows and their chance to hit the party members is pretty much garbage, if you have 16 guys that are just being left alone because the party wants to tunnel on the boss and they're firing at your spellcasters, even if they miss 80% of the time, that's like 3 guys or 4 guys around that are still hitting and are still forcing concentration saves, and it's just going to be easier for the party to clear these guys out with some AoE spells. And sure enough, that's what the party ended up doing. But that's fine to me, right? Like, I'm not trying to kill the party members. I'm trying to make an interesting fight. And so I have my big boss. She's got a couple guys that can cast Counterspell and help protect her. She's got some physical guys that can try to like go toe-to-toe with the party members and give my like physical melee party members kind of their kind of guy to fight, right? That kind of challenge for them, right? And everybody in the party has something that they can do. If the wizard wants to use AoE spells, he can. If he wants to use crowd control, he can. If the bard wants to, he can. And so everybody kind of has their own role. And there's a lot of enemies which I can put out on the map, and it looks kind of intimidating. The party's like, oh man, there's so many guys. But when you start realizing the guards only have like 22 hit points or 25 hit points or whatever it is, they're not so bad. The apprentice wizard has like 25 hit points or whatever because he's a 5th level wizard. Look, the Arcane Archer can kill that guy in 1 or 2 shots. He's not a big deal, even at level 13 still. But the point is, it just gives the party a lot of stuff. And I don't roll for all 16 guards one by one, right? I'll just say, okay, these 8 guards are shooting at this. These 8 guards are shooting at this. Or maybe I'll do them in groups of 4 or 6 or whatever, right? Let's say 4, right? So I'll be, okay, these 4 are shooting at this guy. These 4 are shooting at this guy. These 4 are fighting you guys in hand-to-hand combat. And these 4 I'm going to randomize. They're either going to shoot at the wizard, they're going to shoot at the bard, or they're going to shoot at, one of the 2 melee guys, right? And I'll just roll a d6. 1, 2 is the wizard, 3, 4 is the bard, 5, 6 is the paladin, right? And then, whoever they shoot at, that's who they shoot at that round. Doesn't matter. And I'll just roll for them all at once, right? So just this group, they either all hit or they all miss. This group, all hit, all miss, whatever. And then, I don't have to make 20 some odd dice rolls for the enemy team, right? The other guys are like the wizards are probably just going to do mostly damage spells. My party was already getting CC'd a lot that fight. It was a pretty touch and go fight for the first couple rounds. I've talked about this one before. But, in the end, the party won, right? I had another fight where my party ended up going up against, let's talk about the Vecna fight. That's a good example, right? I knew that if it was just Vecna, again, the party's just going to win. But I also gave Vecna some sort of like a couple other undead. So he has this other Lich who's nowhere near as powerful as him. And then I gave him like this Mummy Lord. And the Mummy Lord starts casting healing spells and buff spells on all the enemies. So there's only 3 enemies this time, and each one of them is fairly powerful. But Vecna's here, the Lich is here, the Mummy Lord's here, kind of thing, right? And so the party just decided, let's just kill this stupid Mummy Lord. We can kill him in like half a round probably. So they just burned him down because they got, he cast a couple of healing spells on Vecna, and they're just like, what the heck? Like, why are we dealing with this? Let's just get rid of the help, And then once he's dead, they kill the Lich, and then the Lich is dead, and then they just tunneled everything into Vecna, And that's fine. The point is that they didn't just kill my big bad in 1 round of combat or 2 rounds of combat. And I gave them other obstacles. I gave them other threats where it's like, oh yeah, the Mummy Lord's got cleric spells. And now he's healing the guy that we were damaging. And he just healed him for like 70 points of damage. That sucks. Let's just kill that guy, And that's fine. My point is that too often I see or hear these dungeon masters where you've got like your one big guy and then he's just going to go toe-to-toe with the party, and then we're like all sad and disappointed and Pikachu faced when it turns out that the fighter decided to use Action Surge and the Paladin used all their highest level spell slots on smites, and the Barbarian of course raged and then rolled 2 crits in the same round because he's using Reckless Attack, and then the Wizard like force caged whoever else we had, or they just force caged your big bad and killed him with range attacks because you didn't think that, oh yeah, maybe he needs to be able to teleport or use range attacks or do something, you just didn't think about it. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with the party members winning those kind of fights sometimes, but if every fight they can just use a force cage and kill your big boss with him not being able to fight back, that's a problem. It's a problem for you, and it's a problem for the players too. So, I guess to kind of sum things up. Number 1, give your monsters more interesting abilities. That doesn't mean you have to rush out and buy a bunch of third-party books, right? I'm not saying that at all. What I am saying, though, is that you can always look at other editions of the game. You can look at other similar things. You can just think about it in your head. Like, okay, I got this cool dragon, and he's like a fire dragon. What if I just gave him like a fire aura? Like, he's some named dragon. He could have a special ability. He could have a fear aura and a fire aura. Why not? Paladins can have multiple auras going at once. And then, now anybody who starts like near him in hand-to-hand combat or enters the aura for the first time, that they take a bunch of damage and save for half, right? Give them a saving throw for half. And the aura doesn't have to do truckloads of damage. Just the fact that this guy has an aura is going to make your party go, whoa, how come this guy's got a fire aura? Red dragons don't normally have a fire aura. And you're like, yeah, this guy's unique. He's like a named dragon. You already knew that. And they're like, oh, crap. And now they start thinking, like, what other abilities do he have? And then he uses the fear aura, and players like, oh, he's got a fear aura? And you're like, yeah, all dragons have a fear aura. Remember, you guys already knew this. You guys have fought dragons before, and they're like, oh, yeah. But, now the players are kind of rattled. They're seeing something they weren't expecting. And now, like, every little thing that happens, like, wait, did his breath weapon recharge on a 3, or does it recharge on a 4? You're like, guys, it's mostly a normal breath weapon. Mostly. And they're like, oh, mostly. It's the exact same breath weapon. It doesn't matter at this point. You've already thrown them something different, and now the players are kind of like, it's thrown them off their game a little. They're used to dealing with dragons, but they're not used to dealing with this dragon. And now it's a little more exciting for them. It's a little more nervous. And it just makes the game a little more challenging and therefore a little better. And I find that most of the really, really great fights my party has had have been ones where sometimes I just throw a bunch of stuff at them and I don't even know how they're going to survive. And there's a part of me that's just like, oh man, I hope this isn't too much for them. Like, I hope they don't die. Like, please, don't let them die. Don't let them die. And you just know that if they have a run of bad luck, they could die. But if I start fudging the dice and let them live, if I start cheating for them, if I make the fights too easy, that also robs them of their victory. I remember we had a fight when the party was like, I think it was in my White Spire campaign, but they were low level. They were like 3rd or 4th level. And they fight this one guy and all his minions, and he's trying to like sneak these guys into the city so they can do the siege. They're coming in through the sewers and stuff, right? And the party finds out about it, so they go to try to stop it. And they end up fighting him, and they manage to seal the thing off, but some of the guys have already gotten inside, so they fight him and all his minions. And it was one of the closest fights we have ever had at any level range. And like, it was right to the wire. 2 of the party members almost died. I think altogether, like 2 party members went down, but the paladin went down like twice, or maybe even 3 times. I can't remember. It was touch and go. They're like, she like drops, they're like healing word her back up. She like used to lay hands on the wizard, I think it was, who went down. So now the wizard's back in the fight. But then the paladin gets hit again, and she drops again. They got a healing word her back up again. Like it. And I think she might have gone down. I think she was unconscious again for the 3rd time by the end of the fight. And, the wizard's holding on with like 1 or 2 hit points. And it was like razor thin. But my players were just like, by the time they ended, they were just like, that was one of the best fights we've ever had. And I was just like, man, I thought the same thing. I was the whole time through. I was so nervous. I'm just like, oh man, like 1 or 2 crits, and they're dead. Like, that's how close it is. And I don't want them to die, but I also don't want to like ease the tension and just let them win. And I think that's one thing that I've loved every edition of Dungeons and Dragons, right? I love 5th edition, or I wouldn't have a Dungeons and Dragons channel. But I do have complaints about 5th edition too. And one of the complaints I have is that they really have they've balanced the game in such a way that, D&D was always favored towards the players to win most encounters, right? And it should be. But it's like way in the players' favor these days. It's pretty hard to have a total party kill unless the party just has an epic run of bad luck, unless the party makes just the dumbest decisions ever, or unless the DM just throws something that's like way out of their league, and the party just can't deal with it, right? But for the most part, it doesn't happen. And, even if players do die in 5th edition, you've got things like resurrection spells available as a 3rd level spell already, The game's never been more player forgiving and, easier in some senses than it is right now, And I think that when you go too far in that direction, it kind of robs the players of some of their victories. And so one thing I work very hard on as a Dungeon Master is to try to make the game, as challenging as I think I can be. And my players, like, even with me trying to make challenging encounters for my players, there are fights where they just still, like, absolutely destroy the content and just like walk right through it. And I'm just like, wow, thought it was going to be a little harder than that. But you know what? Like I said, it's fine, right? Spells like Force Cage and Maze exist. You just got to live with it. I love high-level D&D. I really do. And so I'm just aware of the fact that, the wizard's got Force Cage. He's probably going to Force Cage something. Oh, and he's got Maze. Well, he's probably going to cast Maze on something too then. That means, like, it just is what it is. But the monsters can also have those spells. And even if your players counter it, there's nothing more awesome than, when the players realize that the monster is trying to cast Force Cage on your barbarian and your paladin, and you're like, oh, that suddenly changes the whole complexity of this fight. Like, if our frontline guys can't get on the front line because they're Force Caged, and now suddenly the wizard and the bard are the front line, we're not in a good spot. We need to counterspell this. And, I love that kind of stuff. I will say D&D, I think it was D&D Beyond recently, they just put out a video talking about, it was mostly about the Dungeon Master's Guide and their upcoming changes to the totally not 5.5 or 6th edition Dungeon Master's Guide. But they also mentioned the monster manual in there. And they want to make the monster manual bigger. They're planning on having like 500 monsters in it, which is good. Although I'll point out that each of those Kobold Press books have like 600, I think, in each one of them plus. But whatever, like baby steps, still bigger than the current monster manual. I got to give them that. They wanted to like alphabetize it so that I think the example they gave was so gelatinous cube would appear under G instead of under O for ooze, because it's currently in the oozes section. Whatever, that kind of stuff is nice, but you know, that's what the appendix is for. If I can't find it under G, I'm like, what the heck? Where's the index? Oh, here it is. It's under ooze. Okay, whatever. You know. But the thing that I did like was that they said they wanted to try to make better range of challenge rating encounters, right? So they said, especially on the high end, they felt there was a lack of good high-level challenges. I kind of agree. They also said that they wanted to have like better NPC coverage for different things, right? So if you look at, say, the Monster Manual right now, right? You have like cultists, and maybe you'll have cult leader, but they're all like tier 1 stuff. They're like really weak. They want to have a tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, and tier 4 version of those things, which I think is awesome. You know, why not? You want to have NPC like priest. Why not have a NPC cleric that's tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4? And then, you know, whatever level range you are, you've got a generic template that you can use for the players to fight. I personally love that idea, right? Obviously, adding more high-level challenging monsters, perfectly okay with that too. I also hope, though, that they do a better job of working with some of the low-level monsters, right? So one thing I've mentioned before, it's not a big deal because we're going to talk about the Summon Lesser Demon spell. And frankly, that spell is not great to begin with. But there's a particularly large hole in that spell, which is that you can either get like CR1 demons, right? Like a Quasit, for example. You can get CR1 half demons, and you can get CR1 eighth demons, I think. Or maybe it's 1/4, whatever it is, right? Like mains or whatever mains are. The problem is with the CR1 half demons, because in the Monster Manual and Mordenkainen's, maybe not Volo's, I can't remember for sure, but in the first 2 Monster Manual type books we got, there were no CR1 half demons. There's 1/8, I believe there's 1/4, and there's CR1. But you got a spell that can summon CR1 half demons, and you have no CR1 half demons. That's kind of a bit of a problem for me, you know? Like I said, it's not a great spell to begin with, but now the fact that one of those options doesn't even exist in the game just makes the spell even worse, you know? And I'm not saying that if we had CR1 half demons that people would suddenly be like, Summon Lesser Demons is a great spell suddenly. You know, that's not going to be happening. But like, if you're going to have that option in the game, at least have something in that level range or in that CR range that they could summon. You don't, you know? Like, that's kind of a bit of an oversight, you know? And that kind of stuff just sort of bothers me. So anyways, I guess, like I was going to say, to sum everything up, I got distracted when I was summoning, when I was summing up the last time. Use more creative monsters. Give your monsters special abilities. Use monsters from other, you know, third parties, whatever, right? But just give like little twists and turns to your monsters that your players aren't expecting. Number 2, think about the monster you're using, and if they have any glaring weaknesses, maybe give them some minions to cover those weaknesses. If Vecna can't heal himself, maybe give him some undead mummy thing that can cast cleric spells, and it can heal him, and it can maybe buff him as well, right? If your Drow matriarch can't cast counterspell, consider giving her a wizard sidekick or 2 who can cast counterspell, and make them weak enough so that the party's like, screw these guys, let's just kill the wizards. And then they just, boom, kill the wizards. That's fine, right? They did their job, you know? They don't have to be super challenging in and of themselves, right? They just had to be there to, you know, cover that gap in the monster's defenses, right? So that the monster doesn't just get steamrolled. If you're worried that the party's just going to run into hand-to-hand combat and kill your wizard chick, give her a bunch of minions that can help screen and protect her. And yeah, maybe the party dimension doors right past them and they still kill the wizard chick in round 1. That's okay. At least they had to get creative. They couldn't just run through them all, eating 50 opportunity attacks and then kill her. You know, they had to actually do something. You think outside the box even a little bit. Use some creativity. Use some teamwork. That's fine. I don't mind that kind of stuff. But if they're just like, yeah, we just charge her and kill her, that sucks, right? So give your encounters some thought. Think of how you want to try to balance them better. Give your minions more support. You know, give them more hit points. Do whatever you think you have to do to build a better encounter. But just realize that, you know, your players are going to be using all their special abilities. They're going to be using action surge. They're going to be using smites. They're going to be using high-level spell slots. They're going to be using everything they've got. You know, if the ranger has been walking around forever with a bunch of arrows of elf slaying, and because you've never fought any elves, he just still has those 6 arrows of elf slaying that he got back at level 7, and now he's level 17, and then suddenly they're fighting a bunch of, like, you know, high-level evil elves, and he's just like, oh, we're fighting elves, arrows of elf slaying, and you're like, oh crap, I forgot about that. Well, that's fine, you know, it doesn't matter. But now he gets to feel good that finally, after 10 levels of carrying these stupid arrows around in his quiver, he finally gets to use them. He's excited. Don't take that away from him, you know, just let him use it. Understand that it's okay for your players to win the fight. That's okay. It's okay for them to steamroll your monsters every now and then. But also understand that the players do want to be challenged. They want to have tough fights. They want to kind of sweat a little bit before they win, you know? And, you know, give them those kind of feelings. Give them those kind of fights, because those are going to be the like memorable encounters where they're going to be like, man, you know, and years later they'll be like, man, that fight with Vecna, when, like, remember we had that weird thing where, like, if you called it, then the person would come back to life again. Oh, that was so awesome. And we used it to screw Vecna, you know, whatever. But players still loved it. They still talk about it. I don't care that they meta gamed their way through the whole fight. Whatever. The fact is that it was a way cooler fight, and me being like, no, you can't meta game. You can't use that to your advantage. Well, you just have to hope that that player somehow dies to friendly fire. You know, like, it would have just killjoyed the entire thing. So, you know, don't take away the players' fun, but realize that challenging them is most of the fun in and of itself. Anyways, that's everything I have. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.